Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the 3 best baits for June bass fishing. Some of these are going to be very specific to a certain time period that happens in June, and then the other 2 will be something that I throw the entire rest of June. There's a lot of interesting things that happen in June for bass fishing. Here in Pennsylvania, we still have some fish spawning, but they are starting to make their transition into the post-spawn. Other places, if you're further south, your fish are already post-spawn, and other places up in the north, you can still be having spawning fish right now. But we're going to focus on those fish making their transition into the post-spawn in today's video, as these are usually the baits that I throw all of June here in Pennsylvania and around the rest of the areas of the Northeast here. So the first one we're going to start off with here, this is going to be the one that's going to be very specific to a certain time period. If it works in your water, you have cloudy, windy conditions, something like that, and it's just a bait that usually works in the types of waters you fish, you could throw it throughout the rest of June, but usually I save this for one certain time period, and that's going to be a spinnerbait. The reason I'm saving this for a certain time period, here in June, typically this is when we get our shad spawn here in Pennsylvania, so it'll be on the first full moon of June. This year it's going to be around the second week of June. I think the first full moon is June 14th, so about 3 or 4 days on each side of that. That's going to be when you're going to expect the shad to spawn around this area. The shad spawn can happen on other days of the year, might happen a little earlier in May in some other places up here, and it might not even be on a full moon. They wait for the water temperature to get right, usually around like that 70-degree mark, which is when those fish are starting to transition to the post spawn anyway, and they're going to intersect. The shad are going to go spawn on points and other hard cover rocks that they can get up there, spawn early in the morning in low light conditions, and then get off. The largemouth are going to be working their way out to go out onto some offshore stuff. They're going to intersect, and the bass are going to eat those shad aggressively. If you get out there early enough in the day, you will see these shad physically spawning up on the bank. You'll hear a ton of rippling up on hard cover, and oftentimes you'll see the little shad jumping out of the water. That brings me to the number 1 point I want to go with on my spinnerbait here. The only thing to focus on your spinnerbait for this time of year is going to be the blade selection. So I'm going to go with a double willow leaf, particularly silvers if I can. You want this to look like a little school of shad swimming around. So this right here is a nickel spinnerbait. I have a double bladed willow here, and this is like a blue fleck on top of a silver. Perfect for imitating the shad. If you have some dirty water, you can go with one like this one here. This is another Nichols that has some gold in it, and it's still a double willow, and it also has the chartreuse and white skirt. That's if you have a little bit dirtier water, but typically I am going straight for an all white with double silver willow blades on it, and that is like the only spinnerbait I will throw this time of year. I'll wait for the shad to spawn. I'll fish rocks, wood, docks, anything these shad will spawn on. I'll parallel this spinnerbait around those areas, and you'll know you're in the right area if you feel the shad literally bumping into the blades on the spinnerbait like they're trying to spawn with it. So you'll be reeling your spinnerbait, and it'll feel like fish are tapping at it over and over again, but you think they're fish biting it, but they're not. They're actually the shad hitting the blades, and when they do that, they're actually slowing the blades down, causing it to do something different, and that's the feel of the blade spinning change in your rod. That's what feels like a fish is tapping at it. If that is happening, keep throwing that spinnerbait. You will eventually run into those fish. They're going to be looking for the shad, just like the shad are looking for your spinnerbaits. Now the next bait and the bait after this on my list, these are going to be on my rod the entire month of June, and I will throw them under certain conditions, but they will always be rigged up, and I will always throw them every single day I go out on the water. The first one being a crankbait. I have a bunch in my hand right here. They're going to be different types that I throw. The reason I throw a crankbait this time of year is you're going to have a lot of fish moving quickly, so you're going to want to cover some water. They're going to be trying to work their way to different spots. One day they might be on a point, next day they might not be there anymore. So you're going to want to cover a ton of water with this bait. The other thing it'll do is it'll get down deeper. A lot of these fish are going to start moving offshore. Doesn't have to be a deep crankbait. You can throw square bills and stuff like that this time of year, but a lot of what I'm throwing, these all in my hand right here, are the 6th Sense Cloud 9s. You can start with a C6 if you have some really shallower fish. That C6 goes about 6-8 foot-ish. So if you have some fish that are on that shallower stuff, you can start with that. But the one that I'm going to start with first is actually the C10. This one goes about 10 to 12 foot deep. a little bit in that 8 range. So 8 to 12, that's going to be your first place these fish are usually going to stop. They're going to hit that mid-depth spot first. Next one I'm going to go to is going to be the C15 or the C20, depending on how deep their spots these fish are actually going to get out on. That is going to get a little bit deeper, like that 15 to 17 foot range. That's going to get down there when those fish start getting on deeper points, ledges, stuff like that. We don't have a lot of ledge fishing up here in Pennsylvania, but I know a lot of these southern guys do, and June is prime time for a crankbait, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And then lastly, this one does not play in Pennsylvania too much, but it will play as you get further south or some other types of lakes, or if you have really big fish or really big shad on your lake. This is the C25. This thing gets down really deep. It goes 25 foot deep, and it is a very big bait, and it looks like a giant shad, and you will get some big bites on this thing if you throw it around where you have some big fish feeding on big shad. When they get offshore, they're done recuperating from the spawn. They're not in that post-spawn funk anymore. They're just looking to eat a ton of bait fish. Go to this C25 and try and get some bigger bites out of a school. Oftentimes, if you find a very large school and can throw something to deter the little ones, you can catch the bigger ones out of a school, especially if you're in a tournament. Now, the reason a crankbait works so well this time of year, like I said, these fish are starting to work their way offshore. And now with everybody having side scan, down scan, 360, active target, live scope, all that kind of stuff, these fish, people know where these fish are at. So if you start with a crankbait here in late May, June, that time of year when these fish starting moving off, you can actually catch them on a crankbait right now. You can fire a school up with a crankbait. They're looking to feed. They're aggressive. They haven't been caught much out there yet. They haven't been pestered yet. So you can throw the crankbait and catch them. You'll notice in some of my baits future videos coming up in a couple months here, these crankbaits are going to go away. You'll still have them tied on. I still throw them. I'll put them out there and give them a chance, but I'll start throwing more finesse baits as people start to find where these schools of bass are, because they'll get pounded so much that oftentimes if they see another crankbait, they might not bite at all. And then when it comes to colors on crankbaits, I keep it really, really simple. Mostly you're focusing on depth. Other than depth, I'm going with a shad color, and I'm going with a chartreuse. Those are the only two colors I'm going to throw this time of year. And my last bait for June bass fishing, this is the one that I have tied on every single time I go out. It will be the first bait I throw. As soon as I get on the water, I'll get out there early, and that's going to be a top water. Not just any top water. My go-tos are going to be a walk the dog style bait. This bait will work excellent when the shad are spawning or when you're just trying to cover some water. You can work this bait very quickly. But when those shad are spawning, this mimics them swimming up and down that bank and trying to spawn and do all that kind of stuff. It does it excellent. You can get a chrome color. It really stands out like a shad, or you can get a white one. You can get whatever color you want. You want to fish this quickly and draw those fish in when they're feeding on bait fish. If it's very early post spawn, I talked about this in a previous video, you actually want to fish this bait slower and keep it in the strike zone longer. But if it is past post spawn now, you're starting to get in that early summer range, you want to work this bait quick. You want to cover water, cover as much as you can before that sun gets up, and then you're going to have to go to some other baits unless you have a cloudy day where these fish will eat a topwater all day long. But that's going to be one that I like to throw. You can throw stuff like whopper ploppers and stuff like that as well. I just really like a walk the dog style bait. It's one of my favorites, and I've been throwing it for years. And then if you have bluegill spawns, which will start to happen in June as well, not all your fish are going to go deep. They will actually have some stay shallow. They'll live shallow all summer long. And every 2 weeks or so, you'll have bluegills spawning. You'll have bluegills spawning almost all summer if you can find them, but you'll have major bluegill spawns like every 2 weeks or so or on full moons. And when you find those giant huts of bluegill beds just scattered all down the bank, any cover nearby there is fair game to catch a bass, because they will wait out those bluegills and then go raid their nests and kill the bluegills, eat them, do all that kind of stuff whenever they're hanging out there, and they're pretty much helpless. The number one way I like to catch them when they're doing that is on a frog. A lot of times they're going to get in some very tight, shallow cover. They're going to be in some grass. They're going to be in some lily pads. They're going to be in heavy brush that's up on the bank, underneath overhanging bushes. All excellent throwing a frog around there. It's one of my favorite ways to catch them. I love throwing a frog all summer long, and it's actually one of the baits that I've caught fish 12 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, bright sun sky, but you can skip it under a bush. It imitates a bluegill hovering up, suspended underneath the bush better than anything, and these bass will come get it in the middle of the day. You can get some explosive topwater bites on a frog in the middle of the summer just because they love to eat bluegills, and you'll have fish that live shallow all summer long just feeding on bluegills and spawning bluegills. So those are my two go-tos. Like I said with the topwater, you want to go with some chrome, and you want to go with a white or a ghost color. And then with the frogs, I keep it simple. I go black and white. I'll go black on a sunny day because it contrasts the sky, and then I'll go white on the cloudy days. You have that darker gray black sky in the background. You want that white belly to really stand out. If you can get a bluegill color, like I said, these are bluegill eating fish, so you want to get a bluegill color as well. And if you want to check either of these two topwaters out or that crankbait, these are all 6th Sense baits. This is the Vega Frog, this is the Catwalk, and then like I said, those crankbaits are the Cloud 9s. You can use my code Quince. It'll be down in the description below. You'll save 10% off your entire order, and you'll be helping the channel out a ton as well. And if you enjoyed today's video and want to learn more about what types of topwaters you should be fishing in the post spawn, go ahead and check this video out right here, where I just talked about all the different topwaters you should be fishing. There's more than just these two, but these two are my favorite for the month of June, so go ahead and check that video out. Hit the like button down below and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more of my fishing videos coming up.